If you're going to mediation soon or you have clients who are, consider pre-mediation coaching with us at High Conflict Institute. This is a brand new service we're providing, and here's why. Most people are unsure what will happen in mediation and how to prepare for it, especially in a high conflict mediation. Studies show that regardless of the skill level of your mediator, learning a few key conflict resolution skills can increase your success of settling your matter out of court. Our pre-mediation coach will work with you in a 90-minute one-on-one session by Zoom or phone to help you learn to stay calm, to make reasonable proposals, and make decisions that can last. A small investment with significant positive outcomes. Schedule your pre-mediation coaching session on our website at the link below in the show notes, or call us at 619-800-2070. If you're a lawyer, mediator, or other professional and want more info, just ask us at highconflictinstitute.com on our contact page, or feel free to provide the coaching link directly to your clients today. Welcome to It's All Your Fault on True Story FM, the one and only podcast dedicated to helping you identify and deal with the most challenging human interactions, those with someone who may have a high conflict personality. I'm Megan Hunter, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Eddy.
Hi, everybody.
We are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute in San Diego, California, where we focus on training, consulting, and educational programs and methods, all to do with high conflict. In today's episode, we're going to talk about whether to walk away from a high conflict relationship or situation. Sometimes we have a choice, sometimes we don't. But how do you know when it's okay, or if it's okay, and then how do you do it? So first, though, a couple of notes. Send your high conflict related questions to podcast@highconflictinstitute.com or on our website at highconflictinstitute.com/podcast, where you'll also find all the show notes and links. All right, Bill. So walking away, this is a kind of an interesting one. You know, we don't like to walk away from relationships. We all like to have good relationships and friendships and family relationships. But sometimes, you know, we get this question a lot, like, when is it okay to walk away? Because I'm so exhausted. As we've mentioned on a lot of episodes, the three words we hear the most in this, you know, at HCI are, I'm exhausted from the chaos and I dread seeing this person. It's just a common theme over and over. And when you have those, that experience, you have a decision to make. In some cases, and it's whether you want to continue being in that. If you know, there's some situations you can use the CARS method and be quite successful with it, and others, sometimes, you know, people wonder maybe it's just better to leave this relationship. And it, you know, it kind of can depend on whether it's family or friends. Sometimes it's, you know, the old saying, and you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. But can you? That's the question.
As adults, I like to think that people do pick their adult family, which may or may not be the family they grew up in, their biological family, etc. And we all need families. But sometimes if you've got a high conflict parent, for example, people find that they really can't continue a close relationship with that high conflict parent and become their own person, that there just isn't room for them in the relationship. So you hear about some famous people that won't talk to one of their parents. And I'm always curious, is there a high conflict person here, and who is it? Maybe it's the parent, or maybe it's the, you know, the actor that's cut off that parent. It's hard to know. But family members can be the most difficult because they're part of who you are. They're part of your own development, your own thinking, your own sense of self. Personalities are really formed significantly in the first 5 or 6 years of life. And so there's a lot of the parent in you. If it's a lot of dysfunctional stuff, then you may find you really have to distance yourself from that person in order to find who you really are. That's just one example, maybe a sibling. And in families, people often are closer or farther without ending relationships. They're just not as close to a sibling. Maybe they talk to the sibling once a year instead of, every week. And there's another sibling they talk to every week. I'm always curious when you have a large family, like 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 kids, there's always alliances and there's always kind of groupings, who's close and who's farther apart. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they felt they had to walk away. That's just families. Adult friendships, adult relationships, dating, all of that, that's where it's more common, maybe. And the question is, if it's a high conflict person, then you need to do it carefully.
I read something recently by a man named Martin Iles. He asked the question, is it ever okay to walk away from, what he calls a toxic person? And he made a few notes that I thought were interesting. And one of them was, you've tried everything you can, and particularly maybe in the faith community, in our churches and temples, we're taught to reconcile, to forgive, to make peace. And we try all of those things, but with high conflict people, that doesn't impact. So it really results in one thing, which is probably you getting hurt. The way he puts it is that hurt mounts up to the point where you are psychologically disintegrating from the festival of gaslighting, manipulation, control, deception, and cruelty. And he calls it, an abuse. And that you may well be alone in that struggle, because if they're really good at their game, they'll be an angel of light to most people and nobody's going to believe you, right? So and he goes on to talk about sociopaths and narcissists, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I think for the faith-based community, that community is taught to just, forgive. And you see this lack of understanding the high conflict personality in those situations, and people can really get devastated.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there are churches, temples, mosques that get stuck on high conflict people. They don't know what to do. And I think you certainly can have empathy for them. You can respect them and still protect yourself from them, and maybe even set limits on your relationship with them, either as an organization or as an individual. Sometimes you have to do that. How you do it is, I guess, where I focus, because that you need to do it sometimes. I think we have to accept as a reality. If about 10% of people have high conflict personalities, there's a lot of people they impact. People say we should have empathy for them because if they have a personality disorder, that's a mental disorder. But they impact so many other people that we have to allow ourselves to set limits on them. And one is walking away from relationships.
So when do we kind of hit that point? And I think for many people, they will continue to forgive. They might grovel. They keep trying to resolve the conflict and have conversations and address the problem, address the situation, keep doing nice things for the person, and it just never works. And I think that's probably a point where you do need to sit down, and of course it's individual choice, but to sit down and think it over truly, and maybe talk to someone else who has good insight and isn't just taking sides and becoming your own negative advocate.
Exactly. And I think we have to separate two things. One is having empathy and respect for people, and another is being in relationship with them or not. Because you can have empathy for someone and respect them and choose to not be in a relationship with them. I think that helps resolve it. Like you're saying, in a faith community, is you don't have to be angry, you don't have to be hostile, and yet you can say, this isn't healthy for me, or this isn't healthy for us, and therefore we're setting this limit. That's the key. It's so sad to me how angry people get about high conflict people, because they don't understand them and they don't understand what to do. And the anger, circles around and hits other people, impacts children and all of that. To me, it's not about anger and good and bad people. It's about strategies and people being who they are. We're all human beings, and in many ways, we're all good people, but some of us have more bad behavior. And we have to set limits on the bad behavior. To me, it's not a question of judgment. Like people say, is this a good character or a bad character? To me, it's understanding what's this personality. So like antisocial, which is sociopath, the hardest in many ways, doesn't care, doesn't have a conscience, all of that. I can have empathy for them, but I sure don't want them in charge of my life or even significantly involved in my life. I think there's a purpose for all of these personalities, and that is to push us. And the question is to push us forward or backward. Sometimes these awful personalities have actually pushed humans forward in some positive new directions, but they can't stop themselves. That's the analysis to me is high conflict people make us better as humanity, but they can't stop themselves. So we have to learn how to set limits on them rather than judge them.
Yeah, I agree completely, and it's that's really, really fascinating. The purpose of personality. I think there's a podcast episode in that, or maybe a book. Trademark. So yeah. So let's say you've kind of come to that point where you've tried your best, you've used your best skills. Or you've been listening to our podcast and decided, hey, I need to make a decision about something. Because if you are dealing with someone who maybe has antisocial traits or full on antisocial high conflict personality, that's one of the toughest relationships you'll ever have. And it's maybe dangerous, whether dangerous physically or even like reputation wise.
Yeah.
Like they want to destroy.
That's part of their personality is dominance, conning people, lying, all of that. So let me just briefly say things to consider. The 5 high conflict personality types we generally talk about are antisocial or sociopath, narcissistic, borderline, paranoid, and histrionic. Each of those have considerations if you're going to be walking away from the relationship. So, starting with antisocial or sociopath, there could be danger. These are people who physically hurt other people. They get into fights in families, out maybe at work, etc. So you have to think in terms of protecting yourself. And you may actually, if you're in a close relationship or married to someone like this, that you may have to be in a safe place when they get the message that you're walking away from the relationship. Likewise, borderline personality. Borderline personality is very intense around family relationships, parent-child, husband-wife, boyfriend-girlfriend. Likewise, they could be dangerous at a time. This can be one of the most dangerous times, especially if there's a pattern of domestic violence. The highest risk for serious domestic violence or death is time of separation. So you may be thinking, well, I'm finally getting away from this problem. Well, the problem is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. So you need to be prepared. Narcissistic, they're less invested, frankly, because they want someone else to think they're cool, but they still may feel embarrassed and humiliated if you walk away from them. And this could be family, this could be workplace. A lot of times narcissists, they get fired because of narcissistic behavior, and they may be really angry because they feel really humiliated. They may want to retaliate. Paranoid, similar. Retaliation's part of a theme for them to watch out for. And histrionic's very dramatic, may tell lots of people lots of stories about you. So with all 5, you want to be careful. You want to think through, what's this person's pattern of behavior when somebody walks away from them? What do I know about their history? And think that through and think, what do they do? They're going to do that when I walk away. So do I need to be physically safe before they know? Do I need to do this in a counselor's office so that we can manage the breakup in the workplace? Do I need to have a meeting and human resources present when I say I have to leave this organization? So think in terms of their patterns and how you're going to impact them and how to word what you're doing. And that's an important thing, is don't word what you're doing as it's all their fault, or don't blame yourself and say, I'm just not geared towards the kind of things that you want. I think it's better to just say we're different. Our goals are different. Our styles are different.
Perspectives.
Yeah. So emphasize difference rather than like who's good and who's bad, or who's competent, who's not, or, don't, say, I tell this to lawyers, don't tell your clients that you're not competent to handle their case, because everything you've done up to that point may have been beneficial, but they're going to want all their money back if you say, I'm not competent to handle you. I've discovered that your case is more complicated than I thought. And just say, I realize that your case at this stage needs somebody with XYZ, and so I want to refer you.
And that's not my specialty, right?
Right.
Something like that.
That's not me. And so you're not making it that you did something wrong. It's just where to go from here. Likewise, in a couple relationship, don't say I did everything wrong or you did everything wrong. Say at this point in our lives, and people often do this, they say, I'm growing in a different direction. The other person, no, please, don't change, don't grow. And you say, no, I really need to. Is something like that is better than saying, I just don't like who you are. What was that movie? Came out 6 months ago. Colin Firth and somebody else, the Banshees of Inisherin. And they were like 30 people live on the island. And these two guys have been best buddies. And one says, I want to end our friendship. I don't like you anymore. Well, if you saw the movie, you see what comes after he gives that message. That's not a good way to do it. Anyway, so think it through. That's the key. Think it through, thinking through of steps. It may be small steps. I'm busy. I'm going to be busy a lot the next month, so we're not going to be able to spend as much time together. Or I have this project that I need to focus on. Don't make it personal. And don't, I think, make it too sudden. It's easier for people to adapt to step-by-step transitions. In the workplace, you may need to say, okay, you're on probation now. And then, okay, it's come time where we're going to have to part company. Transitions for high conflict people, it's hard for them to process, and relationships are the hardest. So think it through.
Which is easy to do, or not easy, but easier to do in a professional capacity than in your personal life. And I think that's where we see a lot of, people being emotionally hooked, and then we do maybe take a giant step in walking away, and it can be quite confronting to that person, and really activate that hatred or anger and retaliation, or that need to just dominate and destroy. And when they destroy, they might destroy your reputation to the rest of the family or to a community. And with social media, it can, kind of spread far and wide. When you're really emotionally hooked, I think what I've found is if you have that feeling, if you have a strong feeling about something and you're kind of, it's knocking around in your head and you're feeling it in your body, and, don't go into that conversation, if you're having a conversation or the email that you're sending with that still feeling that strong emotion, because it's going to probably disrupt. It's probably going to erupt, really. There's going to be a bigger problem, because that person's not, the high conflict person is going to react because they're going to do what they're going to do. They're really programmed this way. And if you try to walk away from someone, let's say, with narcissistic or antisocial, immediately it's going to trigger their fear of feeling inferior or dominated. And they're going to attack back in some way. And you're already feeling bad. Now you're going to feel a whole lot worse.
Talk about practicing what you're going to say in counseling with a counselor, with a therapist, and talk through what are you going to say, and then what's the other person going to say, and how are you going to respond to that. This is if you're going to even be having a discussion.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because you want to be safe. In high conflict divorces, I tell people sometimes, be in a safe place and have your kids safe, and then tell the person that you're getting a divorce from them, and have a lawyer who they can immediately talk to and complain about it to, and encourage them to get a lawyer, but have an intermediary and send a letter that says, I want us to do this as peacefully as possible. I think we should try mediation. This letter could be with a divorce petition. They could be served with a divorce petition and a letter that says, let's work on this, and not having a hearing schedule. Just let's work on this in mediation. Let's try to do this in mediation compatibly, collaboratively. And then if you have to schedule a hearing and get decisions made. But that's the kind of step-by-step approach. But think it through, walk through. If you are like telling the person, because you don't feel in danger, but you know they're going to be upset, then practice with a therapist what you'll say, what they'll say, how you'll respond to each thing they'll say. And one of the things important here, say you're splitting up with somebody with borderline traits, is they really want to hold on tight. Abandonment's a big issue for them. And so they're going to try to pull you back in and say, hey, well, what about this? What about that? And a lot of people who've been living with a borderline have been giving in to walking on eggshells, essentially. And so you want to get yourself ready to say, no, I've made up my mind, and this is what I want. If you've made up your mind, maybe, and if you haven't, get counseling. Try couples counseling, see if that makes it better. Sometimes it does, often it doesn't, and at least you've given it a try. But just say, this is where I am. So you don't backtrack, say, oh, okay, well, I won't move out then. Think through what you're going to do.
That's such a hard one. Right. It's a tough spot when people are in that situation because you don't want to hurt the other person or you don't even know what to say. You want out desperately. But I mean, people really feel stuck with this.
Yeah. And let it go step by step. Say, well, we'll keep talking. Let's go to couples counseling and talk about this. But don't reverse course. If you've made up your mind, don't waffle and reverse course. Just go step by step forward. Because what happens when the person thinks you're coming back into the relationship is they become more vulnerable. And then when it becomes clear you're leaving, they're more upset. And that's something you want to avoid. There's a term some people call hoovering. And that is, you're saying, I want to leave the relationship, and they try to suck you back in. That's hoovering like a vacuum cleaner. Some people wonder where hoovering comes from. It used to be one of the most popular vacuum cleaners, so it would suck you back in. And this happens. Sometimes people start having sex with you, and you go, oh, well, this does still feel good. Or this was the best part of our relationship, and you end up back into the relationship. You've got to be ready to say, no, I'm not going to walk backwards, but I'm not going to rush forward. We'll take our time.
No more yo-yo.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's to your point about telling them what you're going to do. That's part of setting limits, and I think that's somewhat of a misunderstood concept. And it's really a powerful tool that we have in if we do make the decision to walk away from a relationship, is remember, I'm not walking on eggshells around this person any longer. I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do. I'll do it in small steps. I'll do it with empathy, attention, and respect, but I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. And we receive so many stories and reports from people who are just terrified of this conversation, and they live for years sort of being battered about emotionally, and they're very afraid.
Sometimes physically.
Right.
And they're right to be afraid. So they got to pay attention to that and prepare.
Yes. So good. Well, any last thoughts on this, Bill?
Just, I really encourage counseling in making the decision, because sometimes there may be something you can do to make things better. Sometimes, let's say you've got a child who's 16 and 2 more years of high school, and you don't want to end up in a big custody battle. And a lot of high conflict people will put you through that. And you fear, well, can I hang in here 2 more years until the child finishes high school? And I've consulted with people that have made that decision, but they have to think it through. And other people have said 2 more years of this is just not going to work. So get ready to do it now.
Okay, very good. Well, listeners, we appreciate you listening, and hopefully this has been helpful for you. Let us know if you have any questions about it. Next week, we're going to talk about a concept, or I guess the experience and phenomenon of splitting. It's a kind of a big topic, so be prepared for that. In the meantime, if you have questions, please send them to podcast@highconflictinstitute.com or submit them to highconflictinstitute.com/podcast. Until next time, keep learning and practicing these skills. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, while we all try to find the missing piece. It's All Your Fault is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Wolf Samuels, John Coggins, and Ziv Moran. Find the show notes, and transcripts at truestory.fm or highconflictinstitute.com/podcast. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.